Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Zero Hangers Trade Target series, where today we will be diving into who Melbourne could be looking at come the off-season. To do that with me is Zero Hanger reporter Aidan Cellini. Aidan, how are you, mate?
Good, thank you, Mitch. How you going?
Good. Demons, always kind of an interesting one just with where their list sits and obviously where their premiership credentials sit. They've, on paper, probably got one of the better lists in the competition, and we certainly saw that come to fruition in 2021. Haven't really, taken too much of a hit to that squad. I think they're only without one or two of those premiership players, one of them being Luke Jackson, obviously, which was a big loss. But they have added some nice pieces. A lot of players are still in their prime, and they've kind of, struggled to have the same impact they did 3 seasons ago. Still been making finals, but that's certainly no guarantee this year. And you'd like to think that their, player movement strategy might be ramped up because of it.
Yeah, well, I think this year especially they've kind of unearthed a lot of young talent. We know Caleb Windsor, Blake Howes, Dan Disco Turner. He's getting more of a look now. So they're kind of taking on the mentality that the Cats have done for so long, so well. Same with the Swans, kind of regenerating on the run, blooding these young stars coming through the competition whilst also, competing. I think they're just outside the 8 at the moment, vying for a spot in the finals, but they're still around the mark. And as we saw on the weekend, they're still, at their best, quite a good side.
Yeah, I think they've done pretty well to be in the position now. They haven't, injuries haven't been a massive concern for them, but they are playing one of the youngest sides most weeks, which is certainly going to be, quite helpful when you look back on the season. And if they do finish in the top 8 with the type of players that they were relying on for most of the year, as you mentioned, some of the names like Windsor, Howes, Colton Thelstrup's getting a look through now as well. So they certainly have found some positives with some new names that they've drafted over the years, and Jacob Van Rooyen, one of them as well, another former first rounder. But I guess, do they look at it's trade or free agency, some more experienced talent that can probably just help them have that immediate jump from 4th to 8th to, 1st through to 3rd. So a few names that we'll look at, mostly looking at list needs. And I think 4 out of the 5 names that we have for the Demons are front half players, because we know the inefficiencies that they've had in the last few seasons, having to use Harry Petty forward. As you mentioned, Dan Turner's been thrown forward and shown some good signs, but I think they probably just need a bit more support in between Van Rooyen, Fritsch and Kazai Pickett. So let's dive into the list now. Top one, maybe more of a ruck forward option than just a full-time forward, but he certainly would be spending most of his time in the attacking third, given Max Gawn's supremacy, is Peter Ladhams. He's one who is contracted for next year, so it's not usually a name that we would raise, just given we like to look at off-contract players and those that are more available, but we do know how it's kind of shifted over the last few years for contracted players and their kind of desire to move so regularly. But Ladhams, moved to Sydney a couple of years ago, had a lot of interest from Victorian clubs. I think Geelong was one of them. When he departed Port Adelaide, went to Sydney because, they really only had Tom Hickey at the time. They've now got Brodie Grundy, and it's really left Ladhams out of the senior side and lacking opportunities. And you can understand why, just given how well Brodie Grundy's gone this season. But you'd like to think that if a club was interested, he might consider a move. And whilst, yes, he's got Max Gawn at Melbourne, it's not necessarily any easier. I think there is a role for him to potentially be that kind of 80% forward or 70% forward, 30% ruck, and alleviate Max Gawn a little bit. And as we're seeing at the moment, Melbourne, while not necessarily struggling, I think they would like to have a backup ruck option.
Yeah, so as we've seen, Max Gawn is clearly the number 1 ruckman in the competition, let alone in Melbourne. Brodie Grundy, who's now the Swans, as you mentioned, did struggle to kind of play that primary ruck role. But someone for like Ladhams, has been seen to be swung up forward at times. He did a little bit of that at Port Adelaide, and when he did get the opportunity at Sydney, did that as well. But clearly just, out of favour with, Hayden McLean and Joel Marty playing that kind of ruck or forward ruck role. But in terms of Melbourne, they do have a lot of young ruckmen with Will Verrill and Tom Fulton, who just came from the Lions. So that kind of, that mid-age bracket, that 26, 27-year-old ruckman who can probably replace Max Gawn in a couple of years' time. Hopefully he keeps going because he's an absolute superstar. And also bridge the gap from their younger stars or younger ruckmen that are coming through, at the moment. I think, it's something that the D's should look at just to remain relevant in that finals conversation heading into the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, it's interesting how they might value Fullerton, given they haven't used him in Gawn's absence. Obviously, he had a pretty injury-struck start to his Melbourne tenure. So yeah, a bit of a wait and see on how he is. But yeah, I think as you mentioned, if Gawn does retire in where it's 2 or 3 years, Ladhams could potentially move into that sole rock position. Another one, New South Wales as well, that the Ds could be looking at is Conor Stone. I think we might have mentioned him maybe once or twice already in this series, as an off-contract former first-round pick at GWS. As more of a medium-sized forward. I think he kicked 14 goals in his first 5 games at VFL level this year. Managed to get a look in at senior level when Callum Brown got suspended, but fell back out quite quickly. Has played a bit further up the ground, even across half-back, and picked up, looked pretty at ease in those roles as well at VFL level. And I think certainly has the potential to take that next step and could just be a nice little piece for Melbourne's front half.
Yeah, I think what goes for Stone is his versatility. I think we've seen him predominantly play as that half-forward role, as you mentioned. But he's a Victorian boy. You can definitely see him probably come back here because he's just not getting consistent gigs in the senior lineup at the Giants. So coming back, I guess, home might make sense for him, but also, I guess, an opportunity. There's a few roles in the Melbourne side that do need a little bit of a plug and play, which Simon Goodwin has trialled with in 2024, using younger guys, older guys. We see Jack Billings and Lockie Hunt, who has been injured, most of this year or predominantly this year, been in the reserve side as well, and even Bailey Laurie as well, who looks like he's playing some good footy in the VFL too. So there's definitely roles up for grabs in the Melbourne side, and I guess with that comes, fighting for that and hopefully better performances for the Melbourne side.
Yeah, for sure. Another one, similar position, you'd say, can play midfield and more of that half-forward, medium-sized forward is Jake Stringer. Easily the biggest name on this list, and one that would be a really outside option for any club to consider at the moment, but he's not contracted for next year. By all accounts, he sounds like he wants a pretty long-term deal, and we know kind of the contract year Stringer saying, and Essendon would love to have 1 year deals for him, I think, and that would make a lot of sense. I think if you're a club like Melbourne and you could stump up a longer deal, that certainly could attract him, and he's a bit of a spark that they might need in that front half. They've got Bailey Fritsch as well, and Keziah Pickett, who are also great ground level threats, but I don't think Demons could do any worse. If they're adding Jake Stringer in, I think he'd be absolutely fantastic. Nice little piece still can be quite a threat aerially, but probably not the tall forward that they might need. But I think he'd be a nice little addition. Yeah,
I kind of love the unpredictability if he were to be in Demons colours next year. You've got Keziah Pickett, who seems to be, creating a bit more of a tank in him, which means probably more midfield time. And then with that, Bailey Fritsch kind of seems like he's struggling up forward on his own. We've seen Jake Melsham injected into the forward, which has helped that mix a little bit. But, add Jake Stringer into the mix and you just don't know who to go to. Fritsch, he kicks his 2-3 goals a game, but Stringer, you can chuck him in the midfield, but also kick, his 2-3 goals a game as well. And then, Jake Melsham, kind of that defensive forward, but always bobs up with a couple too. So it is, as you said, quite left field, but it could be an option that the D's look in, just come in, we'll offer a little bit more than maybe what Essendon's offering, or more security in terms of a longer deal, and could potentially swing them across to the D's, which could be a pretty big coup if they get that done.
Heading back up to the Giants, Wade Derksen, not a name I think a lot of fans, Melbourne fans in particular, would have heard of. Mid-season draft pick a couple of years ago out of Peel Thunder for GWS. Rated as a kind of a ruck, for probably more of an athletic forward who can help in the ruck, but he's not actually as tall as most ruckmen. He's not quite near that 200 centimetre height, but has also, similar to Stone, been thrown in defence as well this season at VFL level for the Giants as they kind of find some versatility. And I think he's certainly got plenty of upside as a nice 194, I want to say, centimetre forward. Good goal kicker, nice long kick as well. And I think he probably might just add something, but like untapped potential, and probably a cheap addition as well for the Demons if they were to look at him.
Yeah, players on this caliber, they got this young raw talent, but unfortunately the Giants, there's just so many good players in that forward line. As you mentioned, he's been trialled, down back and maybe even through the midfield as maybe a secondary ruck. So there's definitely potential in terms of where he could play. The D's do have a few untried younger players, but they're coming through at the moment. As we've mentioned, Turner, they've got Matthew Jefferson, in the ranks as well, and Van Rooyen's coming into his own. So that could be a nice mix to look at, and again, help bolster maybe that second ruck role that they probably do need. They've trialled with a few options this year, but Derksen is definitely one to keep an eye on going into the future. And
Matt Jefferson's a good one you mentioned. Certainly a player that doesn't get raised too much when Melbourne needs to talk about their plans about their forward line for the future. He's certainly a big piece first round pick from a couple years ago. So one to also keep in mind, I guess, when you talk about Melbourne's forward line and where it's heading. Last one, another kind of left field one is Mark Keane at Adelaide. Now he's contracted for next year as well, but I guess there's been some suggestion that he could look to return to Victoria and more namely Collingwood at his former club. But I think if the Irishman, if he's keen to head back to Melbourne at any point, the Des would be, it might be silly of them not to just ask the question and see if they could probably stump up a better offer for him. Be a nice little fit. He's not too old. He's got plenty of time on his side. He's looked so at ease back at Adelaide since returning to the AFL. And I think when you look at the ages of Tomlinson and McDonald and even Stephen May, he'd really help bridge that gap for over the next kind of 5 to 10 years. Yeah,
well, the Pies didn't want to lose him during those COVID years. I mean, went back home to Ireland for that period there, then came back and signed with Adelaide, and he's been a revelation under Matthew Nicks that probably no one really saw coming. I think he kind of came into the side out of necessity, and now it just looks so at ease at the AFL level that you mentioned. But yeah, as you said, the D's should probably ask the question. They do have some aging defenders. Not that they're going to be done by the end of this year. I think Tom McDonald probably has another year or two in him, especially the way he's playing. Tomlinson's can't seem to get a game. And Stephen May, although so important to that side, is on the wrong side of 30 as well. So you'd think someone, as I said, kind of in that mid 20 to 26 to 28 age bracket comes into the side and again keeps them relevant in their push for finals, for the next 2-3 years.
Yep. That wraps up our Trade Targets episode for Melbourne. Let us know what you think in the comments, and obviously you can catch the rest of our series on YouTube and all the latest news, views and opinions on zerohanger.com.